Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Our speaker tonight is Marty W.
Hi, I'm Marty Warner. I'm an alcoholic. And, you know, I come here and people say, oh, you're speaking tonight? That's great. Let me tell you something. That's a lot of fucking pressure for an alcoholic. If you knew, what you just heard is laughter. And that's what heals us. That's what helps heal us, you know. I didn't laugh for a long time when I got here. Kenny, thank you for welcoming me. Laura asked me, but you welcomed me. I know Kenny from when he first got sober, when he first came in. And not a single moment of spiritual growth from him. No. I'm getting even at him because he spoke at my meeting Sunday night, and afterwards he said, oh, I forgot to mention you. I love him. I love a lot of people in this room. I know a lot of people in this room. Lisa, thank you so much. That was a great talk. That really was. And Jen, happy birthday. I remember my first birthday. I went to my sponsor and I said, 3 days, I got a year. So I said, well, what do I get for a year? And he looked at me and he said, 365 days of continuous sobriety. I said, that's it? He said, that's it. Are you kidding? No. He said, anything else is an extra benefit. That's a fringe benefit. And I got to tell you, when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was not a vision for you. I was angry, hostile, and resentful. I didn't trust anything or anyone, including cats and dogs. And God and I were not on speaking terms, you know. And I came here, I was 34 years old, on my 34th birthday. I love what Serenity Sam always used to say, because when I heard him say it, I was pretty new, and I kept an eye on the door, you know, in case I wanted to leave. And because, like I say, me and God didn't talk much, unless I was cursing him out. And I walked into a meeting in North Hollywood, and Sam was just speaking, and he said, I came through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous. I fell on my face, and there was an arrow in my back, and there was a note attached to the arrow, and the note said, fuck you. And it was signed God. And I knew I was home, you know, because that's the way I felt, you know. That's the way I felt. He was getting back at me, you know. But I stayed because, for the people who are new in Alcoholics Anonymous tonight, I wish you the same desperation that I had when I got here. I think that's a very main ingredient, you know, very main ingredient, to be desperate. If the party isn't over, you may not stay, you know. Oh, and I want to say, the guy that gave, the second guy the cake, I don't have the list here, the brother, the gay brother. You know, What are you doing March 22nd? I want you to give me a cake just like that. You know, exactly like that. I love it. I can say that because I lost a brother. He was gay, and I lost him to this disease, and I lost him. He had no. It was the wrong thing. He died much too young, and he couldn't stop drinking, and he went in and out of this program. And I know that if I could have given him anything, I would have given him everything I had, but he just wasn't willing. You know, he wasn't willing. You know, I heard it said from the second birthday guy tonight, the two things that kept him here. And this may rattle some people, but for me, the two things that keep me here is not drinking and not using. You know, I think we overlook that very often. I think we overlook that, you know. If I don't drink and I don't use, I got a shot at tomorrow. I got a shot at tomorrow, you know. And that's what it's all about. It's all about having another shot, getting another chance, you know. And, you know, I've been sober a long time. When I got sober, well, let me tell you, when I got sober, they called this A. Well, if I don't drink and I don't use and I don't die, in about 5.5 months, it'll be 40 years. And that's impossible for a guy like me, you know. There's nobody in this room who saw me come in, say. But there are people in the program who saw me come in. And one of them is my sponsor today. And I was not a nice guy. And I didn't like what I saw here. I didn't like you. And if anybody would stand still long enough to listen, they said, you know, how's it going? I'd say, well, you know, I hate you. I hate the book. I'm not interested in the steps. You know, I'm not interested in your cockamamie fellowship. Yeah, and the hell with God. And I kept that attitude for a year, you know. But I didn't drink and I didn't use. And I did what I was told. See, in those days, most sponsors, in fact, just about every sponsor I know, told newcomers what they had to do in order to stay sober. Now, my sponsor never told me what kind of job I should have. I'm Marty Warner, I'm an alcoholic. He never told me, you know, who to go out with. He just told me when I can start dating. But he told me the things I had to do to become a human being. See, because I had no idea when I got here. You know, I know, there's very few things I do know, but one of the things I know for sure is that when I was a kid in high school, in public school actually, and I used to go to Mr. Crab's office, who was the principal, and I would go there so often he taught me to play chess. I am absolutely positive that when he would say to me, and I'm sure he said it like counselors in schools say it all the time, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'm absolutely positive I didn't look at him and smile and say, I want to be a drunk on Skid Row in Los Angeles. But you see, at 24, that's what I was. By the time I was 24 years old, that's where I was. And I'd been married and divorced, and was to get married again and divorced again. You know, I couldn't figure women out, so I kept marrying them. And, you know, I just knew that it was God's fault. See, I was born and raised, I was raised in the Jewish religion. Now, where I come from, in my home, it was very, very confusing for a little kid to be Jewish. Because I couldn't understand, I mean, you know, we had to keep a kosher house. And when I got older, I realized it was because my grandmother only lived a few blocks away, and if she ever walked over and saw it wasn't kosher, you know. So a kosher house meant all kind of different dishes. And it also meant we couldn't eat pork, and we couldn't have shrimp, and we couldn't have lobster, but we could have it if it was Sunday afternoon and it was in a Chinese restaurant. See? And that was very confusing. See? I also had to go to Hebrew school after regular school. Now, if you don't know what Hebrew school is, that's the Jewish equivalent of our Sister of Perpetual Agony. And I know there are a lot of people who know what that is. See? And they told me what this God was, and I didn't like him from the gate. I mean, you know, this is a God that struck out at people. You know, if you didn't do what he said, he'd turn you into a salt lick. I mean, come on. I had one of those at home. I called him Dad. You know, I didn't need that. And so I had a very bad situation with God. Now, I had to be bar mitzvahed because my father needed the money. It's the truth. I know, but it's the truth. That's what he told me, you know. I said, how much did I get? He said, what do you mean you? He said, you know what this cost to put on? My father also had a belt, and he knew how to use it. And I had my own room until my brother was born when I was 13. And he would tell me to go to my room, and he would be there in a short bit if I would, you know, did something to anger him. And he said, I'll be there in an hour or a half hour, whenever it was. And he never, ever disappointed me in that area. You know, he showed up just when he said he would, you know. And I'd just lay on the bed, you know, on my stomach and drop my pants and just wait for it. You know, I got to that point. But, you know, the interesting thing about that is that I got sober, and I had to be sober a few years, and I had to take a second inventory before I discovered that the reason he did that was because of the way I was acting. See? The reason he did that, I instigated it, because in my household, the only kind of attention I got was that kind of attention. I didn't get any love. In fact, I was in the service in Mississippi, and we were sitting on the beds on a Saturday, you know, drinking, and the guys were talking about how their fathers took them fishing when they were kids, and how much their fathers loved them fishing and hunting, and, you know. And I can remember sitting there and saying, if that's love, what was I getting? See, because I thought I was getting love, because my father would say to me, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you because I love you. Yeah, right, you know. And then he would hit me, you know. And I was just a really nasty kid, you know. I was just antisocial, you know. I hated being told what to do. And I grew up that way. And when I got out of public school, I was to go to high school, and they wouldn't let me graduate because for some reason I put it in my head not to memorize the Star Spangled Banner. And they really, and my old man had a field day with me with that one, you know, but I just wouldn't do it. I just wouldn't do it. And so they passed me on to high school, you know, and I couldn't graduate the way everybody else did. And I went to high school, and I finished high school because my father told me I had to finish high school. You know, he said there are two things, because he didn't finish high school. You know, he didn't even finish grammar school. You know, they grew up on the Lower East Side of New York in those days, and, you know, they all went to work. And there were two things my father told me. That, you know, number one, I had to graduate high school. And number two, he never wanted to open the door of the apartment and see a strange woman standing there and call him Daddy. You know, never wanted to see that. You know, never wanted me to, you know, bring a strange kid home, is what he was saying. And that's the way I grew up. You know, I started drinking when I was 13. I drank a lot of champagne one night because it was a wedding. We were up on Central Park South, and the wedding was late, so they said, okay, give everybody champagne. You know, now I had been bar mitzvahed, so, you know, all my relatives said, oh, he's a man now, he can drink, you know. And I got to tell you, I loved what it did. You know, I really loved what it did. Now, up until that point, the only drinking I did was kosher wine during the high holidays. And I had a little cup like this, and I would get a cup. And I liked that. I always wanted more of that, you know. But when I got drunk that night, and I got so drunk, and we got to the table to sit down, and I was really sassing my old man, and he told a cousin of mine to take me downstairs and walk me around the park. That was Central Park. And sober him up, you know. But the thing he didn't do was he didn't hit me. And something clicked up here, you know. Something clicked up here. And I started drinking every opportunity I got. And we had booze in the house. My old man, I mean, my father was not a drinker. My mother was not a drinker, you know. But they raised two kids who turned out to be alcoholics. But I started drinking. We had booze in the closet because my father was in a business where that's what they gave on Christmas. Everybody got booze. And he would bring it home and put it in the closet for people who came over. And his big drinking was New Year's Eve. He would fix a highball, watch the ball come down, or listen to it on the radio before we had television. And when it hit at the bottom, he would go, "Happy New Year," take a couple of sips, put it down, and go to bed. And it got to the point where I couldn't wait for him to go to bed, okay, because I would finish it, you know. And I got to tell you, this is my own belief. I'm not alcoholic because of what alcohol did to me. Like I said, I've been in and out of jails across the country, you know, 2 nut houses. I was on Skid Row in 60 out here when I first came out here. But that's not why I'm an alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic, I believe, because I loved what alcohol did for me. Alcohol and drugs, what they did for me, not to me, see. Because when I would drink, everything became okay, see. I became better looking. I became taller. I became smarter. You know, it became longer. You girls too, yours became bigger too. But, you know, and I love something that Clancy says. You know, can I use that word here, Kenny? Clancy? Can I say Clancy here? I love something that Clancy says. You know, I never went to bed with an ugly woman. Woke up with a lot of them, but I never went to bed with one, you know. And, you know, and I finally got off of Skid Row and I got a job in the business that my family had been in, which is the floor covering business. And I kept getting fired because I was doing a lot of drinking, you know. And that was my life. And I got to a point, I don't know about you, but I got to a point where I really didn't expect anything else. You know, that was going to be my life. That's the way my life was, you know. I'd come to wherever I came to, with whoever I came to with, you know. I would steal and do whatever I had to do to get enough money to do what I needed to do to get my medicine. And that was my life. And up until I was 24. Now, just before I was 24, I met a gal at another program who was an alcoholic as well, and she would go to AA meetings. And I liked her, so I went to AA meetings. Not all the time. You know, I couldn't take a steady diet of AA. But I would go like on a Saturday night, you know. And she never paid much attention to me, you know, because I didn't look like much in those days. You know, but there were 2 guys. One was, some of you will remember the name, Lee Larson, long gone now, and another guy. And they would take me to coffee at Coffee Dan's. This was the Saturday night young people's meeting. And Coffee Dan's is now Denny's in Gower Gulch. And we would sit and talk about drinking. And they would say, you have blackouts? Well, yeah, I've had blackouts. So what? You know, ever get drunk driving? Oh, sure, of course. You know. And they would do this thing at the end. This would happen almost every time, and almost every time I went to coffee with them for some dumb reason. Because I knew that what was coming. And at a certain point, they would do this little thing. Maybe you've had it done to you. they would lean across the table, the two of them. They'd put that shit-eating grin on their face, and they would smile and say, "Keep coming back." And I knew they knew. And I'd have to say, "That's it, I'm going home." Get in my car, and I'd flame up immediately. By the time I was out of the parking lot, I was halfway high, because I knew they knew. And I wasn't going to tell them, and I wasn't going to, And a funny thing happened. I did this a bunch of times. I don't know how many times I went to these meetings. And, there's an old thing about you can put a dummy in a classroom, he's going to learn something eventually. And I remember I had a party for my 24th birthday. A friend of mine, who was still a friend of mine, from Miami Beach, where my parents had moved to. I found them, but they moved there. They didn't tell me. Hello? I got too serious, I guess. But anyway, he threw me a little party for my birthday. And I walked in, and there was my drink sitting there on the counter. And in those days, when I could afford it, I drank bourbon and dry vermouth, which was a bourbon, a martini. And it was 100 proof bourbon. And when I walked in and I saw the drink sitting there waiting for me, a very strange thing happened that I do not recall ever happening before. But I suddenly thought, I wonder if I can drink tonight like a normal person. Control my drinking. I wonder if I can do that. And that's what I set off to do. And I came to the next morning, or afternoon, whenever it was, and I was in my bed, not remembering how I got there. And again, it was full of puke and pee and everything else. And I remember going to the bathroom, slipping on some puke from the night before, and getting into the bathroom and hugging the bowl as I regurgitated again. And at that instant, I knew I was an alcoholic. I had my spiritual awakening, if you will, And I went to a meeting that night. It was a Saturday night. I went to that meeting, and I raised my hand for the first time as an alcoholic. And that was March 22nd, 1969. Now, a lot of things happened in my first year. One of the things that kept happening was there was a core of guys and a couple of women who would drag me wherever they went. They would say, "Be ready, we're picking you up at 7." But be ready, And they would buy the food, they'd buy dinner, which was a fascinating thing for me to see. They would fight over the bill, and I never understood that. For the privilege of paying the bill. I didn't have any money. I had nothing. I was living in a one-room room with wall-to-wall dirt. My room looked like behind that curtain, when I first came here. And they would take me and they would talk to me about all this stuff. And they would treat me like I was, like they really cared. And I used to wonder, what the hell do they want from me, But because they were feeding me and because they were, picking me up and they were paying attention to me, I went, and I would sit in the room. And there was a guy that I got friendly with right away because I heard him share and I liked some of the things he said. And I was thinking about asking him to be my sponsor. And one day I said to him, "Jim, I want to tell you something." I said, the other night when we were talking about whatever it was, I said, "I lied." And he said, "So?" And I said, "What do you mean, so?" "I'm telling you, I lied." He said, "Okay, so?" I said, "I thought this was an honest program." And he said, "You can't lie to me." And I said, "Who the hell are you? What do you mean I can't lie to you?" And he said, "No, you can't lie to me." I said, "Why not?" He said, "I don't give a shit." He said, "You lie to me, I'm going to sleep tonight. You might not, but I will." And that was my first lesson. See, a couple of months later, we had come from Radford. We went over to the what do you call it, the Dupars over there on Ventura Boulevard. And we pulled into the parking lot, and there was this beautiful red Cadillac convertible with a white top, white interior, and a gorgeous blonde behind the wheel. And I got out of the car, and I just stared. And Jim said, "You like that?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "The girl or the car?" I said, "Both." He said, "You can have that." I said, "No, I can't." He said, No, you can have that." I said, "Come on." He said, "I'm telling you, you can have that." I said, "I really can?" He said, "Yeah, but not right now." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "You're going to have to do a lot of changing before you can attract anything like that in your life, the car or the lady." And we went inside and we sat down. And he said to me, "Marty, what is it you want from this program? Tell me the truth. What is it you want?" Now, Jim was a successful writer, producer. I had no thoughts about show business or anything like that. But I had to do what I normally do, which was I got to come up with something that will impress him, so he'll like me. So I thought and thought and thought, and I finally said, "I just want to be comfortable." And Jim said, "Sorry, I can't tell you how to be comfortable." And I said, "Then why the fuck did you bother asking me?" And he said, "Relax. I can't tell you how to be comfortable, but I can tell you how to stop being uncomfortable." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah. Would you like to know?" And I stewed for a moment or two and finally said, "Okay, smart ass. How do I stop being uncomfortable?" Now, the next sentence out of his mouth, I could have lived to be 1,000. I wouldn't have figured it out. That's how brilliant I was. He looked at me, he smiled, and he said, "Stop doing what makes you uncomfortable." And I still didn't get it. See, I didn't understand what that meant. See. But I acted like I did because I was never going to let you know I didn't know. It didn't matter what it was. I wasn't going to let you know I didn't know. And I finally came to figure out what that meant. When I started getting into really working this program, and I started seeing the things that I was doing to push you out of my life, it all came clear to me that that's what I was doing. See, that was wrong. You weren't acting out towards me, you were reacting to me. See, because I was a total asshole. I was angry, I was hostile, I was resentful, like I say. You know, I didn't care about you. And that's the way I acted, and that's the way I treated you. And that's why I kept saying what I said earlier. What do these guys want from me? They keep taking me everywhere, because I knew what I was. I knew how I was. But that was my MO. I knew you were going to eventually say, "Oh, you're a piece of shit. We don't want to hang around you." And so I would push you away before you could say that to me. Because that's what I believed. See? And so I started changing. I started working the steps and started changing how I acted towards you. And a very weird thing happened. You started acting towards me differently. So, and that's what this program is really all about for me, you know. I had to learn to change the way I was acting, the way I was being, who I was. I had to learn that. Now, at the end of my first year, I got to tell this little story. At the end of my first year, I had a big argument with my old man. They were living out here at the time. I had a big argument with my old man on the phone, hung up on him, told him to screw off. And I stewed it with that, and stewed with that, and stewed with that, until finally, after I took a cake that night at Poly Hall Young People's Group, that 1 year cake that I had, that one candle, I went and got in my car and I drove out to SC Medical Center, the neuropsychiatric ward, and I begged them to put me away. And the doctor said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I took a butcher knife the other night to kill my father. I had it in the car, I was sitting in front of the house, and I wanted to kill him. And I'm sober and clean in Alcoholics Anonymous for a year." He said, "Did you kill him?" I said, "No, but I sure wanted." He said, "What stopped you?" I said, "I don't know. Today I know, of course, you know." See, my father was looking out for me before I even recognized that he was there in my life, you know. Before I knew God was in my life, he was already looking out for me all the time. And so we went back and forth and back and forth. And he said, I can't give you a room, but I will put you in the outpatient clinic. Okay. And he reached for the prescription pad that was on his desk. And I said, I don't take anything that affects me from the neck up. I told you I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said, this isn't habit forming. And I said, what is it? And he said, Valium. See, in those days, Alcoholics Anonymous truly believed, for most doctors, alcoholism was nothing more than a Valium deficiency. You know. And so I picked up an ashtray and I threw it at him. I was angry. Justifiably so. I came and asked for help and he said no. And I ran down the hall and I remember shouting at the top of my lungs, my name is Marty Warner, and if I kill someone, it's your fault. Because I came and asked for help and you wouldn't help me. And I went outside and I looked around and I knew I was screwed. Because I don't know if you were listening, but the nut house had just rejected me. And if you want to know what rejection is, because you have to remember, twice in my life they had already accepted me with open arms, you know. Had a nice little padded cell for me one time, you know. Had shock treatments for me another time, you know. So here they rejected me. Now I have been playing poker with Jim and a bunch of the guys, and one of the guys became my sponsor. Bob E. had become my sponsor because I liked the way he talked and I knew that he would help me save my life. And like I said, he told me the things I had to do. And they would talk about God on Wednesday nights playing poker. And I talked about poker because I still wasn't talking to God. You know. But that night, I knew I had nowhere else to go. And as I went down the stairs and I started crying, and I hadn't cried since I was about 14, because I stopped crying when my old man hit me because I was going to show him it didn't hurt. It didn't help, but... And I hit my knees, you know. Now, I don't know about you, but a nice Jewish kid from Brooklyn, he doesn't hit his knees. You know, but I hit my knees and I said, and I never forgot this, I said, Father, and I called him Father because they called him Father on Wednesday night. I said, Father, if you're there, you got to help me. You just got to help me. And the next thing I heard him inside of me, outside, wherever it was, if you stop fighting, I'm here. And I knew exactly what that was. And I got off my knees, and I walked towards my car, and I knew immediately why I was resisting this program so much my first year. You see, that first step says you give your will and your life to God. Of course, it doesn't say that, but that's what I thought it said. Number one, I was not a giver. Number two, I wasn't going to give anything to God. See? So that was out of the question. But I understood it that night. See? And I made a deal with God. That night, I made a deal with God on my way to my car. And the deal was simple. I said, Father, if you hang in, if you stay with me, and I was feeling something that was going up and down my spine, and, you know, I was getting chills, and, you know, if you hang in, if you stay with me, I promise you I will never again go over it, around it, or under it. I will walk through and I will take everything you got to throw at me. Excuse me. I'll take everything you got to throw at me, good, bad, or indifferent. See, and that was my third step. And I called my sponsor the next day and he said, okay, now you got to start doing some more things. Because you see, for the first year, my job was to get to a meeting before it started, not leaving until it was over, sit in the front row, thank the speaker, whether I wanted to or not, become responsible for my chair, my cup, and my ashtray. Those were the things I had to do. And I was about 7, 8 months sober, and I finally said to him, I got to ask you a question. He said, what? I said, what the hell has all that got to do with staying sober? You know, I don't get it. And he said, Marty, he said, I have yet to meet an alcoholic newcomer who was not short on patience and long on attitude. And you're going to have to turn that around if you want to stay sober the rest of your life. And doing these things will turn it around for you. See? And I didn't realize what he was saying. He was saying, you know, what we say in Alcoholics Anonymous. I cannot think my way into right action. I have to act my way into right thinking. And that was the beginning. See? And then after that night, I called him and he said, okay, now you got to read the book. Okay, how do you know I didn't read the book? He said, everybody knows you didn't read the book. You know, oh, okay. In fact, one time I called him, I had this job, and I called him, and I kept saying I wanted to quit the job because I was afraid they were going to fire me because I didn't know what I was doing. In the meantime, they were giving me raises. You know, company was called, the brothers were called Kennedy, no relation that I know of. Good old Irish people who, you know, comes 3 o'clock, they bring out the Irish whiskey, you know, and I'm sober now, so I can't drink. But they kept giving me raises periodically, and I would call Bob and say, you know, I really want to leave this job. And he'd say, well, you know, your track record on work sucks, so you should stay there another couple of weeks or so. I said, okay. And so I did, and then I would call him again. And finally one day I said to him, I want to leave this job. And he said, look, you keep telling me that. I want to know, why is it you want to quit the job? And I said, because I can't stand the fucking job, that's why. And he said, did you read the book? And I said, yes, which was a lie. And he said, well, read it again, and when it gets to the page that says you got to like it, call me back and let me know. Click. You know, and that's what I got in AA. That's the way they treated me, and I'm so grateful for that. You know, I mean, I got treated with the truth, with the absolute truth. Nobody told me to go home and be paid $47 and you'll be okay, you know. They just gave me the truth, and I recognized it somehow. You know, I remember Mike Ross. Some people in here know who Mike was. Mike had 45 years when he died, and he was 21 years sober when I got to AA. And I remember going to Mike one time, and because I got to a point where I didn't want to do anything. And people would say, well, pray. And I'd say, that's doing something. So I went to Mike when I finally had enough of it. And I said, Mike, look, I got to talk to you. I said, I don't want to do nothing. And don't tell me to pray, because that's doing something. I don't want to do nothing. And he looked at me, and he was like 6'5". And he smiled, and he says, Marty, you don't want to do nothing? You don't have to do nothing. I said, I don't? He said, no. You just have to be willing to pay the price for not doing anything. I snapped out of it just like that, because I knew exactly what he meant. See, I have to be involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, from my first day to 39 and a half years later, I have to be involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. One more quick little story. I also had an attack of alcoholism the other night, you know. There was a situation where I went to the VA and to, you know, get involved again after 35 years because I have good insurance, but because my leg was giving me some trouble and service connected. And I don't know the rules there, you know, so they gave me a card and they took care of some things for me. And then I called them that evening and told them that, you know, I had forgotten a couple of things that I wanted them to do for me. And I didn't leave my last 4 digits of my Social Security number. Okay. So a day goes by, 2 days go by, 3 days go by, so I call again, and I leave another message, and I send a fax. See? And nothing happens. And I call again, and this time I talk to the guy at the desk outside. And he said, well, that's your primary care person, and, you know, you tell her and she'll take care of it, you know. I said, well, she's not calling me back. He said, well, give me your name and number, and I did, and he said, I'll give it to her. Okay. Now, the other night, because that cough I have that you just heard, there's something, it's not a cold, but it's something that I'm going to have to go see a doctor about. But I'm laying in bed, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, and I start thinking about the VA and this woman. Clean that up good. You know, and of course I'm starting to, it's like, you know, when my head does that, I don't know about you, it's like a train leaving the station. You know, the wheel spins a little and catches, spins a little more, the train starts moving, a little more, before you know it, I'm going 200 miles an hour down the track. And I'm going to do this to them, and I'm a vet, and I'm going to blah, 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 that. And I finally fell asleep. I get up the next morning, well, actually, it was late in the morning, because couldn't sleep till about 5 a.m. And I call her on the phone, and she says, oh, yes. She says, I wanted to call you back, but you didn't leave your Social Security number, and I couldn't look you up in the system. And she took care of everything I needed. See? But a couple of nights earlier, the night earlier, I was ready to kill her. I was ready to absolutely kill her. And if you knew, I don't want to take away any of your hope, but like I say, I'm 39 and a half years sober. So what am I saying with that? What I'm saying is, you're never going to get rid of alcoholism. You got rid of the alcohol, the ism stays. See? And it waits for moments when it can attack. And it attacks. Now, the good thing about the difference between being new and having 39 and a half years is that it doesn't happen very often, and when it happens, it doesn't last long. See? When I was new, it was good for 2 weeks of resentment. Something like that would be good for 2 or 3 weeks, easy, But now, I know how to handle it because you gave me the tools. You gave me the tools. See? And if you want to stay sober, not just today and tomorrow, but if you really would like what you found here and you'd like to do this the rest of your life, then you have to immerse yourself in these tools. And you have to do it even when you don't want to do it, And that's the hard part, Eddie Regan, a guy who died also many years ago sober, used to say, don't tell me you got a great program and everything's going well for you. But when it's 3 a.m. and you're in the midnight of your own soul and you get through that, then you can tell me you got a good program. See? And that's what it's about. People go out and they come back and they say, oh, I learned so much by going out. Yeah, you learned the fact that you can drink if you want to. That's my opinion. That's what you learned. This program teaches me that if I have a higher power and I can learn to trust him and turn things over to him and learn to, live my life that way, I can walk through anything that comes down the path, including finding my brother's body December 23rd, 2004. Anything. And you can too. I guarantee it. All you got to do is try. Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.